Chapter 1. The ground beneath Mara Valen's boots groaned with the weight of centuries. She stood at the edge of a once thriving city, now reduced to rubble, the skeletal remains of what had once been a symbol of human ingenuity. The wind howled through the hollow buildings, echoing the desolation that had overtaken Earth. She wiped her brow, her fingers brushing the dust of a forgotten world. The sun was a mere sliver in the sky, a feeble reminder of days long past. And above her, the looming alien warships glided silently, an ever-present reminder of humanity's downfall. Mara's mind drifted back to the days before the Zather arrived. She remembered Earth as it once was, a bustling, vibrant planet filled with hope and progress. Humanity had reached the pinnacle of technological achievement. The cities were connected by high-speed rails, and people lived in harmony with nature. The skies were filled with the hum of airships, and the world seemed bound for an era of prosperity. But it wasn't meant to last. The Zather arrived without warning. Their fleet tore through the atmosphere, darkening the skies like an eclipse. Mara could still hear the sirens, the chaos. The first wave of attacks devastated major cities in minutes. The Zather's weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Energy pulses that turned buildings to ash and vaporized entire military units in seconds. "We didn't stand a chance," Mara muttered to herself. The city she stood in was a perfect example of that. Once filled with the sounds of life, now only silence remained. The Zather had taken it all, every last resource, every last piece of hope. And humanity, scattered and broken, was left to scavenge for scraps in the shadows. Mara shook her head, tried to rid herself of the bitter taste of defeat. There was still a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread that she clung to. The resistance. She turned her attention back to the horizon, where the remnants of a once thriving human civilization lay in ruin. The underground cities, the last refuge of humanity, were scattered across the globe. From these hidden havens, the survivors had rebuilt what they could, but the war was far from over. And Mara, now a leader in the human resistance, had seen enough death to last a lifetime. She walked to the edge of the ruins, her boots crunching on the broken glass and debris beneath her. The wind carried the scent of ash and decay, and the distant hum of alien machinery filled the air. Yet, amid all the destruction, there was a flicker of life, a faint, stubborn pulse that refused to be extinguished. "Mara," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Commander Lucius, her right-hand man, approaching with a weary but determined look on his face. Lucius had been by her side since the earliest days of the resistance, and his loyalty had never wavered. "Do you ever stop thinking about the people we lost?" Mara asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Every day," Lucius replied quietly, his eyes scanning the ruined city. "But we can't change the past. We have to focus on the future." Mara nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She knew Lucius was right. The past was gone, and no amount of mourning could bring it back. But what they did next, the choices they made today, would determine if humanity had a future at all. "Have we heard from the others?" she asked, her gaze never leaving the horizon. Lucius hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, they're ready. We've got one shot at this, Mara. If we fail, humanity's finished." Mara's jaw tightened. There was no room for failure. There could never be room for failure. She turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze with a resolve that burned like fire. "Then we can't afford to waste any more time. The weapon is our only chance. We activate it, and we take back what's ours." The weapon, the one piece of technology that had been hidden deep beneath the surface of Earth, lost to time and war. It was the key to everything. They didn't know exactly how it worked, only that it was humanity's last hope. The Zather had scoured the planet, searching for it for decades, but somehow, humanity had kept its location a secret. "We're close," Lucius said. "The underground team has pinpointed its location. It's deeper than we thought, and the Zather have a stranglehold on that part of the world. But it's our only shot." Mara's fingers brushed the hilt of her weapon, the sleek, unfamiliar design reminding her of the countless sacrifices that had been made to get this far. "We'll get it," she said, her voice steady. "We don't have a choice." The wind began to pick up, carrying with it the distant rumble of alien craft. The Zathar were out there, watching, waiting. But for the first time in years, Mara felt something other than fear. She felt the stirrings of hope, fragile but undeniable. They were still alive, and as long as they were alive, they could still fight. "Gather the team," Mara ordered, turning back toward the underground base where the rest of the resistance awaited. "It's time." As she descended into the depths of the underground city, Mara's mind raced. The path ahead was treacherous, and they were walking into the heart of Zathar-controlled territory. But for the first time since the invasion began, she felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. This mission wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming their future. The resistance had never been this close to victory. The weapon, the key to humanity's future, lay just beyond their reach, and Mara was ready to do whatever it took to seize it. The resistance was about to take the first step toward humanity's resurgence, and there would be no turning back. This chapter sets the stage for the story by establishing the devastation caused by the Zathar invasion, introducing the protagonist's motivations and the central conflict. It transitions from the past to the present with a focus on the protagonist's determination to fight back and reclaim Earth, providing both emotional depth and a clear objective moving forward. Chapter 2, the underground city buzzed with a tense energy. Mara could feel it as she stepped into the dimly lit war room, where her most trusted allies awaited her. The air was thick with anticipation and unspoken fears. The mission to recover the weapon was more than just a tactical move. It was humanity's last hope. Failure wasn't an option. Commander Lucius stood at the table, his fingers tracing the holographic map spread before him. The resistance had been piecing together information from different sources for months, but now, the pieces were finally falling into place. The weapon was somewhere deep in the Zathar-controlled region, a place where even their scouts feared to venture. It wasn't just a mission of survival, it was a statement. Mara's eyes scanned the room. Around the table sat a diverse group of men and women, each carrying their own stories of loss and survival. The weight of their shared history was apparent in their expressions. They had all been through too much to turn back now. "Everyone's here," Lucius said, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. He knew the risks. They all did, but there was no time for doubt. "This is it. We move out at dawn." "Mara, what's our first move?" Mara nodded, her mind sharp despite the emotional exhaustion. "We infiltrate their outer defenses, locate the entrance to the lower levels, and move fast. We'll hit them where they least expect it. It's our best chance." She felt the familiar weight of leadership settle on her shoulders. She'd been the one to hold them together when things seemed hopeless. But now, even she felt the fear creeping in, the uncertainty of the unknown. They were about to venture into the heart of enemy territory, and no one knew exactly what awaited them. Still, there was no room for hesitation. "I'll lead the front," said Riker, a young soldier who had been with the Resistance since the early days. His voice was filled with that youthful fire, brimming with the kind of optimism that Mara sometimes envied. Riker had lost his family in the first wave of attacks, and he carried the weight of that loss with every step he took. "You'll be with Lucius," Mara said firmly. "We'll need to move quickly, and your experience in the field will keep us sharp." Riker didn't argue. He understood. There was a time for bravado, and there was a time for strategy. This was a mission that required both. As the meeting continued, Mara's mind began to wander, thinking of the faces of those they'd lost. Her father, a scientist who had been one of the first to identify the Zathar's true nature. Her mother, who had died in the chaos of the initial invasion. But the most painful loss was her younger sister, Alina. The memory of Alina's bright eyes, full of hope, still haunted her. She had died during the first raid, an innocent victim taken by the very creatures they now fought to destroy. "Captain, we're ready." Lucius's voice broke her from her thoughts. The urgency in his tone brought her back to the present. Mara looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person who would follow her into the unknown. There was fear Yes, but there was something else too, determination. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future. Get her gear, she said. We move in 2 hours. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Weapons were checked and rechecked, supplies gathered, and the team assembled in the staging area. The heavy, metallic hum of the underground city's machinery faded into the background as everyone prepared for the mission that could change everything. Mara stood by the entrance, her mind running through the plan one last time. She knew the risks. Every one of them was a target. The Zather had eyes everywhere. But this was it. There was no turning back. I'll see you on the other side, Lucius said, giving her a rare smile as he strapped on his helmet. His usual stoic demeanor had softened over the years of fighting alongside her. But Mara knew that in moments like this, he was still the unwavering pillar that held the resistance together. Riker gave her a nod of acknowledgement, his youthful energy now tempered with the seriousness of the mission. We won't let you down. Mara returned the nod, swallowing the lump in her throat. There was no room for sentiment here. She couldn't afford it. The lives of everyone in this room depended on their success. She stepped forward, leading the way through the winding corridors of the underground base. The group moved with quiet efficiency, each step taken in silence as they prepared for what lay ahead. Outside, the world had fallen into twilight, the fading light casting long shadows over the desolate landscape. The remnants of the once thriving cities were little more than ghost towns, their towering structures now hollowed-out shells. The Zather had not only ravaged Earth's cities, they had turned entire ecosystems into barren wastelands. Mara's boots crunched on the dirt as they made their way to the surface. The air felt heavier here, filled with the stench of decay. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, scanning the horizon. There were no signs of movement, no indication that the Zather had detected their presence yet. But they wouldn't stay undetected for long. Everyone stay sharp, Mara ordered, her voice calm but firm. We move fast, we move silent. The team moved swiftly across the wasteland, sticking to the shadows. The cold wind whipped through the ruins, carrying with it the remnants of humanity's last efforts to resist the alien invaders. But the destruction was far from over. Mara's team had a purpose now, and they couldn't afford to let fear slow them down. As they neared the Zather-controlled territory, the group split into smaller squads to avoid detection. Riker's team would scout ahead, while Lucius and the others would set up defensive positions in case of an ambush. Mara and Lucius would take the lead, finding the entrance to the lower levels where the weapon was hidden. Minutes felt like hours as they moved through the desolate landscape, the only sound being the soft rustling of the wind and the occasional crack of shifting rubble. There were no signs of the Zather yet, but Mara knew they wouldn't be so lucky forever. They reached the perimeter of the Zather-controlled zone just before dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten, casting a faint glow over the ruins of the city. This was it. The weapon they sought was buried beneath the Zather's strongest fortress. Mara turned to face her team, their expressions grim but resolute. Stay focused. We're almost there. Let's make history. And with that, they moved forward into the heart of the enemy's domain, where the fate of humanity would be decided. Chapter 3, the first hint of dawn touched the barren horizon, casting a sickly orange glow over the lifeless world. The team crouched low against the shattered remains of a once proud monument, its purpose now long forgotten. The air was thick with the acrid scent of decay, a constant reminder of the Zather's relentless march across Earth. Yet, despite the desolation, there was a sense of purpose among them. They had come this far. There would be no turning back. Mara scanned the area, her eyes sharp and alert. The Zather's fortress lay ahead, its towering, spiked silhouette cutting through the pale sky. She could hear the distant hum of alien machinery and the subtle vibrations in the ground, signs of the Zather's technological grip on the land. Every inch of this place was controlled by them. It was a fortress both in design and in practice. Any sign of them? She whispered to Lucius, who was crouched beside her, his gaze focused on the structure ahead. Lucius shook his head, his face hard. Not yet. But they're here. They've been here for a long time. Mara nodded, her jaw tightening. They had no time to waste. They needed to get inside, find the weapon, and leave before the Zather even knew they were there. "We're getting closer," she muttered to herself. "Stay focused." The team was silent. They knew what was at stake. Each step forward was a calculated risk, each breath a reminder that their survival depended on the success of this mission. They moved with purpose, slipping between the wreckage of the old world, using the crumbling buildings and shattered remnants of humanity's past as cover. They reached the outer perimeter of the fortress without incident, the quiet hum of alien energy pulses vibrating through the ground beneath them. Mara crouched low, checking the map once more. They had pinpointed an access tunnel leading into the lower levels, just beneath the heart of the fortress. It was the only way in, and it was guarded heavily by automated sentries. "This is it," Mara whispered, signaling to Lucius. "We make it to the tunnel. We move quickly. No detours, no mistakes." Lucius gave a nod, his expression stoic but filled with the understanding that this was the moment of truth. They had no room for error. The team began to move again, their footsteps light and careful. They approached the entrance of the tunnel, a reinforced steel door buried beneath a mound of rubble. The guards, a mix of mechanical sentries and Zather soldiers, patrolled nearby. Mara knew their best chance was to avoid detection. She held up her hand, signaling for the team to halt. They were close. The door was just within reach, but the guards' patrols were unpredictable. They needed a diversion. "Riker, take your team and move to the left flank. Create a diversion," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Lucius, you and I will cover the right. We get in and disable the entrance before they can react." Riker nodded quickly, his youthful energy tempered by the seriousness of the situation. He and his team peeled off, slipping into the shadows as they moved to create the necessary distraction. Mara's heart raced, the familiar rush of adrenaline filling her senses. She turned to Lucius, who met her gaze with a quiet understanding. Together, they moved toward the steel door, ready to take their shot. As Riker's team engaged the Zather on the far side, Mara and Lucius pressed forward. The door to the tunnel was guarded by a complex security system, one that required precise timing to deactivate. They had only one chance to make it work. "I've got this," Lucius said, his hands moving deftly over the control panel. "Just keep your head down." Mara kept watch, her fingers resting on the grip of her weapon. She could hear the distant sounds of combat, blaster fire, and the unmistakable screech of Zather forces engaging Riker's squad. The tension in the air was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Lucius gave a sharp nod. "We're in." The heavy steel door groaned as it slowly slid open, revealing the darkened passage beyond. The team slipped inside, moving quickly into the narrow tunnel. The cold, damp air hit them immediately, a stark contrast to the hot, arid wasteland outside. But there was no time to rest. "We stay quiet," Mara instructed, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't afford to alert anyone to our presence. Keep your weapons ready." The tunnel was cramped and disorienting, its walls covered in alien glyphs that glowed faintly in the dark. The further they descended, the more the air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. Mara felt it deep in her bones. The presence of the Zather, ever watchful, always hunting. The feeling of being surrounded, even in the darkness, was suffocating. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the thick concrete beneath their boots. Every corner they turned brought them closer to their objective, and with each step, the weight of what they were doing grew heavier. They were close, so close to finding the weapon that could turn the tide of the war. But the further they went, the more dangerous it became. Mara's mind raced. Every scenario played out in her mind. The traps, the ambushes, the chance that they might not make it out alive. But she couldn't afford to dwell on that. There was no room for fear, only the mission. Suddenly, the soft hum of alien technology vibrated through the walls. They were getting closer to the heart of the fortress. Mara could feel it. "We're almost there," Lucius murmured, his voice tense with anticipation. The group slowed as they reached the final door. A heavy, reinforced barrier stood between them and the weapon, humanity's last hope. It was guarded by more automated sentries, their glowing red eyes scanning the area with precision. Mara took a deep breath, steadying herself. They had reached the most critical point of their mission. "Ready?" she asked quietly, turning to the team. Lucius nodded. Riker and the others were poised, weapons in hand, their faces set in grim determination. Mara gave a final nod. "Let's do this." They moved in unison, a perfectly coordinated attack. Lucius and Mara took down the sentries with precision, while the rest of the team cleared the area. The weapons chamber lay just beyond the final door. Mara could almost feel it, humanity's future, waiting on the other side. As the last sentry fell, Lucius worked swiftly to disable the security systems on the door. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The door creaked open, revealing the hidden chamber beyond. There, standing against the far wall, was the weapon, a towering structure of metallic alloy, pulsing with an eerie blue light. It was magnificent, yet terrifying. The weapon was more than just a tool of destruction. It was humanity's last chance to reclaim their world. "We've found it," Lucius breathed, his voice filled with awe. Mara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Now, let's make sure we don't lose it." Chapter for the chamber was silent, but for the steady hum of the weapon's energy core. The immense structure loomed in front of Mara, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. This was it, the key to humanity's survival. The weapon, hidden beneath layers of stone and guarded by alien technology, pulsed with a low, blue glow. It was the last hope of a dying world. Mara stepped forward, her boots echoing in the cavernous space. The air was thick with tension. Her breath felt shallow, her pulse quickening. There was no turning back now. "Lucius, do you have the control panel?" Mara asked, her voice calm but tight with urgency. Lucius nodded, his fingers already working on the console. "It's a complicated system," he muttered, his brow furrowed as he studied the alien interface. "But I think I can bypass their security protocols. It'll take a minute." The rest of the team stood in a loose formation around them, weapons at the ready. Riker paced nervously, glancing back at the door they just breached. "We've got less than a minute," he said. "The Zather will be on to us any second." Mara's eyes darted to the entrance. She could already hear the faint hum of Zather forces mobilizing outside the chamber. They wouldn't have long before the entire facility was swarming with enemies. "Do it faster, Lucius," she ordered, her voice steady despite the rising pressure. Lucius's fingers danced across the alien interface, his expression one of concentration. "Almost there," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just a few more seconds." The low hum of the weapon's core grew louder, and a cold shiver ran down Mara's spine. It wasn't just a weapon, it was the heartbeat of a dying world, the last flicker of hope. It had to work. Without warning, the door to the chamber slammed shut with a violent metallic clang. "Ambush!" Riker shouted, raising his weapon instinctively. Mara's heart raced. The Zather had arrived faster than expected. She raised her rifle, her fingers tightening around the trigger. "Get into position," she shouted. "Prepare to fight." "Lucius, don't stop." The rest of the team spread out, using the towering walls of the chamber for cover. Riker, ever the eager soldier, sprinted toward the far side of the room, taking up position behind a large stone pillar. He peeked out just as the first wave of Zather soldiers rounded the corner. The Zather were swift, their armored forms gliding effortlessly across the room, their weapons raised in unison. Mara could see the glint of their sharp, cruel eyes as they advanced. The alien soldiers moved with precision, their mechanical limbs clicking and whirring with every step. "Cover fire," Lucius yelled as he continued to work on the interface, his hands shaking slightly from the pressure. Mara didn't hesitate. She fired a shot, the blast ringing out with a loud crack as it struck one of the Zather soldiers. The creature screeched, its body crumpling to the ground in a cloud of dust. Riker followed up, his blaster sending shots in rapid succession, hitting another enemy in the chest. but there were too many. Fall back, Lucius shouted suddenly, looking over his shoulder. I need 5 more minutes to finish this. Mara gritted her teeth. We don't have 5 minutes. She leveled her rifle and took down another Zather soldier with a clean shot to the head. The body hit the ground with a sickening thud, but more soldiers were coming. A loud roar echoed from the doorway, followed by the sound of metal scraping against stone. Mara's eyes widened in horror as she saw the massive Zather war machines charging into the room. These were the Zather's mechanical beasts, hulking, armored creatures that could crush anything in their path. This just keeps getting better, Riker muttered under his breath, his rifle now useless against the towering machines. He switched to a grenade, priming it quickly. We need to take out those things now, or we're dead. Mara's mind raced. We focus on the war machines first, she shouted. Use everything you've got. She didn't wait for a response. Moving with precision, Mara sprinted toward the closest war machine, her rifle blazing. She was already calculating her next move. There was a weak spot in the armor, just beneath its core. She aimed, her pulse hammering in her chest. Now, she yelled. Riker threw the grenade, and the explosion shook the room, sending debris flying through the air. The war machine staggered back, its exterior dented from the blast. Mara fired, hitting the weak spot just as another grenade detonated beside her. The creature screamed in agony as it collapsed, sparks flying from its broken limbs. One down, Lucius called out, his voice strained. But the fight was far from over. More war machines were advancing, their heavy footsteps reverberating through the chamber. Mara's team was pinned down, unable to hold their position much longer. She knew they needed to act fast, or they'd be overwhelmed. Lucius, she shouted again. Hurry, I'm almost there. Lucius replied through gritted teeth, sweat dripping from his face. Give me just a few more seconds. Mara's heart raced. She knew they were running out of time. The Zather were relentless, and they would not stop until the resistance was wiped out. She had to hold them off long enough for Lucius to finish. Riker moved to the left. Flank them, Mara commanded, pointing toward the advancing war machines. Riker nodded and sprinted off, firing shots at the approaching enemies. Lucius worked furiously, his hands moving faster as the interface flickered beneath his fingers. Mara took up a defensive position, firing shots into the advancing Zather soldiers. She could feel the heat from their weapons as the blasts whizzed past her, but she kept her focus, knowing that the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Then finally, Lucius spoke. It's done, he said, his voice ragged but filled with relief. The weapon systems are online. It's ready to fire. A surge of energy filled the chamber. The weapon's core pulsed brightly, its blue glow lighting up the darkened room. A deep, resonating hum vibrated through the ground, shaking the entire facility. Mara stepped forward, her pulse quickening with both fear and hope. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. This is it, she whispered, her hand hovering above the activation panel. This is our last chance. The team rallied around her, their eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. They had fought, they had bled, and now, with one final push, they would either save the world or watch it burn. Mara pressed the button. The weapon fired. A blinding blue light erupted from the core, sending a shockwave of pure energy across the room. The walls shook, the air hummed with a terrifying force. The Zather soldiers, caught in the blast, were incinerated in an instant. The war machines crumpled under the weight of the energy beam, their massive frames collapsing like ragdolls. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the weapon powered down, leaving the room in a heavy, oppressive quiet. Mara stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it. Humanity had a chance. But what cost? We need to get out of here, Lucius said, breaking the silence. This place won't stay down for long. Mara nodded, turning toward the exit. Let's move. We've got a future to build. And with that, the team moved out of the chamber, leaving behind the ruins of the Zather's empire, knowing that humanity's battle for Earth had only just begun. Chapter 5. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and burnt metal, the remnants of a battle that had seemed impossible just hours ago. The Zather fortress, now reduced to rubble, lay in ruins around them. The weapon, humanity's last hope, had discharged its deadly pulse and wiped out the alien forces in a blinding wave of energy. But as the blue light faded, the weight of what they had done settled in. Mara stood at the edge of the wreckage, her body still trembling with adrenaline. The explosion from the weapon had taken its toll. Her ears rang, her vision swam, and her heart raced from the sheer force of it all. But she knew this was the beginning of something far greater than any battle they had fought so far. Humanity had a future again. Lucius approached, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes alight with something Mara hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. "We did it," he said quietly, as if still trying to process what had just happened. Mara nodded, her throat tight. "We did, but there's still work to be done. We need to move fast. This place won't stay silent for long." Riker joined them, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "Do you think this will be enough to stop them? The Zather?" "I don't know," Mara replied honestly. "But it's a damn good start. We've shattered their hold on Earth. Now we make sure they don't regroup." The team had done the impossible, taken back a piece of their world, and with the weapon's discharge, they had sent a clear message to the alien invaders. Earth wasn't theirs for the taking. Not anymore. "Where do we go from here?" Riker asked, his youthful energy still burning, though tempered with the grim realization that this wasn't over. Mara didn't hesitate. She knew the answer already. "We regroup with the others. We got to get the message out. We start uniting the scattered forces, and we start pushing back, one city at a time." As the team moved away from the fortress, the world around them began to settle into a new kind of quiet. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Mara knew they would face more struggles ahead, more sacrifices, but they had something the Zather didn't: the will to survive. The journey back to the underground base was long and uneventful. The closer they got to their destination, the more the magnitude of their victory began to sink in. Earth, once a dying husk under the Zather's control, now had the chance to heal. The weapon had done more than just destroy the alien forces. It had triggered a shift in the planet itself. Nature, once choked by the environmental devastation the Zather had caused, had started to show signs of recovery. The skies were clearing, and the air, once thick with the stench of pollution and warfare, seemed fresher with each passing mile. Mara and Lucius led the way, their steps slow but purposeful. They had won this battle, but both of them knew they had not yet won the war. The human race was scattered, divided, struggling to survive in pockets across the globe. It would take more than just defeating a few Zather soldiers to rebuild civilization. They reached the underground base in the early hours of the morning. The once dimly lit corridors now felt different, warmer, brighter. It was as if the whole place had come alive with the knowledge that a new chapter had begun. The Resistance fighters gathered in the central command room, eyes eager, filled with curiosity, and perhaps, for the first time in years, with hope. "Gather everyone," Mara said as she entered the room. "We have work to do." Lucius took a seat at the communication station, tapping quickly at the console. Riker stood beside Mara, his face reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Riker asked. "They have to," Mara said, her voice steady. "We've given them something the Zather couldn't take. Hope. We've shown them that it's possible to win." Within minutes, the room was filled with Resistance leaders from other sectors. These were people who had fought in the trenches, hiding from the Zather's gaze, waiting for a sign that the world was not lost. The sight of them, their tired eyes, their determined expressions, reinforced what Mara had known for years. Humanity was not weak. They were survivors. Mara stood before them, her voice strong and commanding. "We've struck a blow against the Zather. We've hit them where it hurts, but this is just the beginning. We need to unify, gather the survivors, and push back. Every city, every community, every stronghold needs to know what we've done here. The message is simple. We are not done." She paused, letting her words settle in. The room was silent, waiting. There's a war ahead of us, but we're not fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for future, for our children, for our people, for Earth itself. One by one, the leaders nodded, their faces lighting up with a newfound resolve. There was no longer any question in their minds. They would fight, not just to survive, but to reclaim their planet. Days passed in a blur of preparation and strategy. The resistance communicated with every group they could find, sending out messages across radio waves, using every channel available to let the world know that the tide had turned. They coordinated with other survivor groups, urging them to unite and organize for the coming push. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of logistical challenges. The Zathers still had a stronghold in many parts of the world, and there were skirmishes and battles on multiple fronts. But as the Resistance's numbers grew, so did their confidence. The weapon they had recovered was not just a tool of destruction. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience. The world was changing slowly but surely. Mara stood on the balcony of the newly established command center, overlooking the valley below. The air felt different now, lighter, less oppressive. She looked out over the landscape, where the first signs of new growth were pushing through the earth, tentative at first but undeniable. The world was healing, and so was humanity. Lucius joined her, his footsteps steady as he walked up beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching the horizon with her. Finally, he spoke. "We've made it this far," he said quietly. Mara nodded. "It's not over yet, but it will be." The Resistance had begun the process of reclaiming Earth, one city at a time. The Zather would not give up easily, but humanity had proven that it could still fight. And in that fight, Mara had found something more important than victory. She had found the strength to lead, the will to never surrender, and the knowledge that, no matter how dark the future seemed, humanity's spirit would never be extinguished. For the first time in years, Mara could finally see a world where humanity would thrive once again. And in that moment, as she looked out at the slowly healing landscape, she knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but they would make it. They had a future now, humanity's future.